You are listening to Regenerative Artivism, Asian women's creative strategies for social and ecological futures. I'm your host, Mei Qingwan, an art historian working in contemporary Asian art and the environmental humanities. In each episode, we explore how Asian women artists, curators, and community organizers use creative, place-based practice to confront social and environmental injustice and cultivate more livable futures. Thank you for joining me. Let's begin. Today, we are in South China, in the river deltas and mountain headwaters around Guangzhou, following the practice of Chen Xiaoyang. Chen was born in 1973 and is based in Guangzhou. She was trained first as a sculptor and later as a visual anthropologist. She now works across several roles: professor in the School of Sculpture and Public Art, and the executive deputy director of the Guangzhou Academy of Fine Arts Museum. On paper, that sounds fairly institutional. In practice, her work has been about something quite simple and quite demanding: learning how to see places with the people who live there, and then using art to help those people see themselves and their environments differently. She moved away from monumental urban sculpture when she realized how narrow its public often is. Many public artworks are dropped into plazas by committees and developers, with residents treated as spectators at best, obstacles at worst. Doctoral training in anthropology offered her another route into public life: field work, long conversations, living with a place over time. From there, she began to treat art not just as an object or a spectacle, but as a method of reading and regenerating social and ecological relations. In this episode, we will move through three of her major constellations of work: an urban village project in Lijiao, where buried waterways and an old ancestral hall became tools for rethinking redevelopment; an experimental teaching project in Nanting village, where art students learned to treat a village as a field site, not a design problem; and finally, Leming, a mountain village in a water source protection area, where she co-founded a small participatory museum that later was partially demolished, but left behind the skills, relationships, and methods that continue to circulate. Let's begin in the city. Lijiao is an old water village in Guangzhou's Haizhu district, built historically around a network of streams and small rivers. Over decades of urbanization, those waterways were progressively filled, straightened, or converted into underground drainage, while the village itself became a dense urban village packed with rental housing for workers and students, layered over older clam structures and memories that were still there but no longer visible in the built environment. In 2008, Chen and the collaborators launched a research project centered in Lijiao. The basic move was deceptively simple: start with field work. They walked the lanes with elders, recorded oral histories, collected discarded tools and ritual objects, and tried to map the old water system that had once defined the village. Where exactly did the streams run? Where did people wash vegetables, launch boats, perform dragon boat rituals? How did the water organize everyday life before roads, metro lines, and concrete buried the channels? The fieldwork culminated in a site-specific exhibition called Lijiao Station, a despairing coordinated system installed in a reclaimed ancestral hall. Instead of presenting sleek sculptures shipped in from elsewhere, they turned the hall into a kind of social laboratory. On the walls, large hand-drawn maps of the historical streams. On the ground and in display cabinets, fragments of water wheels, farm tools, festival implements, small objects from households. What mattered was not just the objects, but who gathered around them. Elders saw material evidence of the hydrological world they remembered. Young residents and migrants, who knew Lijiao mainly as a dense rental district, suddenly had a visual map of a watery landscape that lay beneath their feet and under their bus routes. The ancestral hall, which had been sliding into irrelevance, briefly became a civic forum again. The exhibition did not stop urban development, but it changed the knowledge conditions around it, and within a couple of years, several ancestral halls and related sites in Lijiao were formally listed as protected cultural relics. When community-based art and ethnography make buried histories visible, they can shift how decision-makers and residents alike imagine what is worth keeping. For Chen, Lijiao was a turning point. It suggested that art could function as a public research method, mapping rivers, assembling artifacts, and curating an exhibition were not just aesthetic acts. They were ways of producing a public conversation about the village's past and future. After Lijiao, Chen wanted to bring this field-based method into teaching. Nanting village, another water village near the newly built Guangzhou University town, became her next laboratory. Farmland on the edge of the city had been absorbed to make way for campuses and infrastructure, and the villagers had turned into landlords, renting rooms to students and the staff. In 2012, Chen launched the Nanting In Situ experimental course at Guangzhou Academy of Fine Arts. Instead of asking students to invent projects inside the classroom, she asked them to go to Nanting, stay there, and begin with observation and listening. The village was not treated as a problem to be solved through design, but as a field where social and spatial relations needed to be understood first. Students learned basic ethnographic techniques, working with residents, mapping spaces of conflict and comfort, listening to very different narratives about the same place. Over successive years, the course culminated in group exhibitions in the Guang Lineage Hall in Nanting. The shows had titles like Profiles of Memory and Nanting as a Method. They functioned as public syllabi. Instead of finished, polished artworks, many pieces looked like enlarged diagrams, annotated models, and participatory devices that staged the village as a place where evidence and feeling could be shared and where students and residents could think together. For the students, this was a lesson in how to see slowly. They were not just learning to manipulate images and materials, but to recognize which aspects of everyday life are visible and which are hidden in plain sight. Nanting confirmed for Chen that art education can itself be a civic practice. If future artists are trained to move between observation, analysis, and public presentation in this way, they are also being trained to see themselves as participants in, not just commentators on social life. If Lijiao and Nanting were experiments in the city's orbit, Leming village brought Chen deep into the mountains and into a different scale of ecological responsibility. Leming sits in Chonghua district, in the headwaters of the Liuxi River, one of the protected drinking water sources for Guangzhou. It's a place of streams, bamboo, and terraced fields. But like many rural places today, many young people have gone to the cities, leaving behind them mostly elders, women, and children. Since 2014, the Guangdong Rural Women Development Foundation had been working in Leming. They started with practical steps, weekly trash collection routines, and a no garbage on the ground norm. Then experiments with ecological agriculture, community kitchens, and natural education for children. Their work strengthened women's organizational capacity and subtly shifted the village's everyday relationship with its environment. Against this background, the foundation invited Chen to imagine an art project that could link to what was already there. Importantly, Chen didn't arrive with a preconceived blueprint. She and her team spent time understanding the village's rhythms, institutions, and aspirations. They eventually named the emerging platform Yuan Art Museum, with Yuan meaning source, as in headwaters that feed the city, and also origin, as in cultural beginnings. This was not about dropping a white cube museum into the mountains. When Chen used the word museum, she meant a long-term public-facing platform, a space, physical and social, where villagers, artists, social workers, and researchers could meet as peers, experiment with craft and expression, and slowly rebuild a sense of shared cultural life. Their anchor point was a pounded earth farmhouse, known locally as the Dragon Eye House, named for the two round apertures above its door that looked like eyes. The building was structurally fragile, but rich in memory. In 2016, 7 artists joined a month-long residency in Leming, living in a village, and using the Dragon Eye House as a base. The project and its opening were called Dragon in Field. The curatorial instruction was simple: pay attention, work with villagers, and use the materials and stories already present in Leming. Artists run workshops for children, making bamboo toys, drawing, photographing daily life. They listened to villagers describe their routines and worries about their children. They also learned from local craftspeople how to work with bamboo, clay, and wood. The renovation of the Dragon Eye House itself was carefully modest. The aim was to stabilize and repair, not to erase all traces of age. When the residency culminated in a small exhibition, villagers walked through a space that still felt like one of their houses, now layered with photographs, small installations, and workbenches. The house began to function as a common, a place where people could come not only to look at art, but to learn and to make. One small anecdote from the residency says a lot about the project's ethic. A child who had been shy around visitors gradually became more confident as he learned to use a camera. When he took photographs of his own village and saw them printed and displayed, he saw himself not only as an object of other people's attention, but as someone who could shape the image of the place. Over the next few years, the Yuan Art Museum in Leming grew through a series of residencies and collaborations. In 2018, a second major residency called the Stream Basin expanded the scope of work. One key participant was the Xishan Song Team, an urban-based collective that works with regional folk music. They joined forces with Leming elders known as mountain song kings and queens. Together, they organized a performance outside the museum where local mountain songs, silent for roughly 2 decades, returned in a call and response with the visitors' songs. After this event, villagers began to organize their own singing sessions during festivals and holidays without needing an artist or NGO to prompt them. A dominant practice had been gently reactivated and re-embedded in village life. Another emblematic collaboration involved a farmer named Sister Ling, who insists on pesticide-free cultivation of her rice, despite the lower yields and higher labor. Artist Hu Yinping entered into a 10-year agreement with her, renting a plot of paddy at a rate higher than its market yield, and using the field for open-ended experiments rather than conventional cash crop production. The harvest would be used for personal consumption or gifts, not commercial sale. In practical terms, this arrangement compensated an ethic of care that already existed in the village. It recognized that Ling's way of farming, protecting soil and water, accepting lower immediate income, had value beyond what commodity prices acknowledge. Translated into the language of art, the work here is the long-term relationship with the field, not a discrete installation. If Sister Ling's field addresses ecological care, the Corner Cabinet project addresses craft and material culture. During the early stages of the Leming work, Chen noticed abundant wooden cabinets in village houses or backyards, triangular corner pieces made by local carpenters, often for weddings or major life events. In the modern consumer economy, such cabinets had come to be seen as outdated and bulky. Instead of treating them as sentimental relics, Chen approached them as objects with social biographies. Their dimensions and joinery told stories about how rural households once related to space, storage, and ritual. She worked with 2 villagers who still had carpentry skills to reverse engineer an old cabinet and reconstruct it using local wood and traditional techniques. From there, the project moved through a loop. Original and remade cabinets were exhibited in contemporary art venues in the city. Urban visitors could commission new cabinets, and a portion of the income funded carpentry training and workshops back in the Dragon Eye House. Both Sister Ling's field and the Corner Cabinet project show how Chen's practice tries to rewire value systems. Instead of treating environmental care and vernacular craft as nostalgic or marginal, she creates circuits where they are recognized, compensated, and linked to broader publics. The medium is part contract, part workshop, part exhibition, a hybrid that only makes sense when seen over years. Another small story comes from a housewife, Zhou Shunqing, who began painting imaginative scenes of sowing and harvesting after initially joining a children's art class that quietly opened to adults. The income from her paintings is modest, but what really changes is her sense of herself as someone whose ideas are worth translating into images and sharing with others. Stories like hers are what I would call microeconomies of dignity. Up to this point, the story might sound almost too smooth. A sensitive artivist arrives with her team, collaborates well, and everything slowly improves. Leming complicates that kind of feel-good narrative in several important ways. As activities in the Dragon Eye House expanded, the need for a more flexible, weather-resistant space became clear. Working with architects and engineers, the team designed a lightweight glass and steel building next to the old house as an extension. Together they form the physical space of the Yuan Art Museum. The style of the extension was minimalist, with sliding panels and open edges. The idea was to blend into the mountains, to create a shelter that could host exhibitions, workshops, singing rehearsals, and village meetings without dominating the landscape. The space opened with an exhibition that documented the 3 years of practice and marked the museum's formal inauguration. Governance was also deliberately structured through a board and an academic committee in partnership with the Women's Foundation. Program decisions were negotiated among artists, villagers, and professionals, with the aim of keeping the museum belong to Leming first. Still, conflicts emerged, as they should in any genuine public space. One early controversy formed around a much smaller structure, a simple rain pavilion in a farming field. A proposed redesign triggered a disagreement over whose view of the landscape it should serve and how much change was acceptable. Instead of pushing the project through, the team convened a village assembly. When consent could not be reached, they halted the construction, leaving a semi-finished frame standing as a visible reminder that not every design move would be completed. A second, much larger test came from outside the village's control. In August 2023, amid a shift in land use enforcement and ecological zoning, local authorities classified the glass building of the Yuan Art Museum as an unauthorized structure. Despite efforts to secure protection, it was dismantled. For many people, demolition reads as failure. The building is gone, therefore the project has failed. Chen's practice pushes us to read the situation differently. The structure was always meant to be modest and lightweight. Its removal is painful, but it throws into relief what cannot be bulldozed so easily: the social and ecological capacities that have been built. The women's group continues its weekly environmental routines and eco-agriculture. Carpentry skills persist in the hands and bodies of those who trained in the Dragon Eye House workshop. Mountain songs are now part of holiday rhythms again. Farmers like Sister Ling continue to embody an ethic of care, recognized by their neighbors, whether or not a city-based art world is looking. In that sense, the demolition sharpens one of the core lessons of this episode. For regenerative Artivism, the main medium is not the building. The medium is the pattern of relations, skills, and shared memories that can survive the loss of the structure. So far, we have looked mostly at the villages and small infrastructures. But Chen also works inside a major art academy and a museum, and there the methods developed in places like Lijiao, Nanting, and Leming have traveled into institutional form. In 2025, Guangzhou Academy of Fine Arts introduced a new general education core for all first-year students called Methods and Practice. It's a 6-week foundation course that asks students to relearn how to see by engaging with actual social environments across the city. Students then disperse into field sites, riverfront neighborhoods, industrial areas, villages near the city, parks, and other everyday spaces. They observe, interview, map, and create small research-based projects. Chen is one of the core designers and teachers connected to this reform. The pedagogical core of Methods and Practice, field before form, exhibition as a way of staging arguments, attention to local ecologies and social contradictions, was developed first in places like Nanting and Leming, then codified as a requirement for students. Often, institutions design methods in abstract and then send students out to apply them. In Chen's case, the method was hammed out in practice, in negotiations with elders, women farmers, carpenters, and village committees. The art school then learned from those experiments. For a listener who is an educator, curator, or student, the implication is clear. Field-based, socially engaged art is not just a specialized niche. It can reshape the default training of artists and designers, anchoring their future work in attention, reciprocity, and ecological literacy. Now, let me step back and offer one reading of Chen's practice through the lens of regenerative Artivism and ecofeminism. In Leming, long before the first artist residency, women were already organizing around sanitation, ecological farming, and community kitchens. The art project grafted onto the existing root system. It amplified capacities that were already there, translating them into workshops, exhibitions, and micro-enterprises that could circulate between village and city. Recognizing unpaid or undervalued care labor as the basis of ecological and social health, it builds art projects that support rather than overshadow it. Chen's work consistently revalues care labor. Sister Ling's field is the clearest example. The performance is a decade of pesticide-free cultivation made financially viable by a long-term agreement that treats care as something worth compensating. Similarly, weekly trash collection becomes part of the museum's cultural fabric, not a low-status chore to be hidden backstage. In each case, the metric shifts from productivity and spectacle to durability and health. Chen also treats craft lineages as living knowledge. The corner cabinet and carpentry workshops are not about freezing a tradition in a museum, but about putting tools in people's hands and connecting those skills to contemporary needs. Packaging for farm products, furniture that fits new living spaces, design conversations that move between urban buyers and rural makers. Finally, there is a distinctive modesty of means. Chen's projects do not rely on massive budgets or monumental forms. The Dragon Eye House, a modest structure, basic carpentry tools, cameras, clay, and paper. These are the main materials. The modesty is not a limitation, but a principle. It keeps the work close to what is actually sustainable in rural life and makes the methods portable to other contexts. As we close, I want to leave you with a few images and questions. Picture the hand-drawn maps in Lijiao's ancestral hall, with streams traced over current streets, showing residents that the ground they walk daily still holds the memory of water. Picture the ancestral hall in Nanting turned into a public classroom, where students and elders co-author the story of a village in transition. Picture the Dragon Eye House in Leming, with children sending balls and aunties learning to use woodworking tools, and a corner cabinet that once seemed worthless, now understood as a piece of living design. Picture Sister Ling standing in her field, deciding again this season to refuse pesticides, knowing that somewhere in the city, an artist and a network of supporters have built a different economic logic around her choice. Picture a group of elders singing mountain songs at dusk after years of silence, their voices carrying across a headwater valley, whose water will eventually reach millions of urban taps. These images are not romantic. They come with conflicts, uncertainties, and real losses, including the loss of a carefully designed building. But together, they suggest a different model of what art can be and do in our time. If you are a listener working in art, education, or community practice, you might ask, where in your own environment are there buried rivers, histories, skills, or ecologies that have been paved over, literally or metaphorically, but could be brought back into view with the right kind of mapping? What would it mean to treat your projects not as one-off interventions, but as contributions to infrastructures of care that will outlast a building or a grant cycle? How might you design collaborations that compensate and strengthen care practices already present in a community, rather than inventing new activities from scratch? Chen's work does not give us a template to copy, but it does offer grammar, begin from fieldwork and relationships, use exhibition as a public method, center women's labor and ecological practice, value craft as knowledge, and expect that some structures will be dismantled while the underlying relations continue. In a time when both rural and urban environments are under intense pressure, this grammar of staying, listening, and slowly rebuilding shared capacity is a form of regenerative artivism that we all can learn from wherever we are. Thank you for listening to Regenerative Artivism, Asian women's creative strategies for social and ecological futures. If this episode brought someone or some places to mind, I invite you to continue that reflection in your own conversations and practices. You can find a short summary and a few references in the episode description in your listening app. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of the places that sustain you.